7-foot Apache woman feared by all Metaquiet cowboy who changed her fate forever. In the vast, sun-scorched lands of the Southwest, where the desert stretched endlessly and the mountains rose like ancient guardians, there lived a woman who was unlike anyone else. She was an Apache woman, but not just any Apache woman. She was said to be 7 feet tall, a giant among humans, and her presence alone inspired awe and fear. People spoke about her in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might summon her. Travelers passing through the desert would pause and glance nervously at the horizon, half expecting to see her figure moving silently among the rocks and sagebrush. Villagers told stories of her strength, of her skill in hunting and tracking, and of her bravery in facing danger without hesitation. She had earned a reputation that spread far and wide, and though few had actually met her, many claimed to have glimpsed her or felt the weight of her gaze. Her story was not one born out of privilege or comfort. She was forged by hardship, by a life that demanded courage from a young age. From the moment she could walk, she was expected to endure the challenges of a harsh environment. Her family taught her the ways of the land, how to find water in a dry riverbed, how to track animals without leaving a trace, and how to survive when storms swept across the desert. But life was never easy, and the world outside her family's small community was even harsher. Encounters with outsiders, some curious and some cruel, had taught her that people could be unkind, fearful, or jealous of what they did not understand, and so she grew not only strong in body, but cautious in heart. She learned to rely on herself, to trust her instincts, and to move through life with a mixture of pride and wariness. Despite her enormous stature, she moved with a grace that seemed almost impossible for someone of her size. Her steps were deliberate, her movements precise. When she walked into a village or approached a camp, people noticed immediately. Eyes widened, whispers began, and children peeked from behind their parents' legs. Some adults tried to hide their unease, but they could not ignore the presence of someone so powerful and imposing. It was said that she could lift objects that others struggled to even push, that she could run faster and climb higher than most men in the area. Her strength was not just physical, it was a force that carried with it the confidence of someone who had faced life's harshest tests and had emerged unbroken. Yet behind this aura of fear and power was a woman who, in her private moments, felt the weight of loneliness. People admired her, some even respected her from a distance, but very few dared to approach her without fear. Her height, her strength, and her skill made her intimidating, and the stories that surrounded her only reinforced this image. She became a figure of legend, spoken of almost like a ghost of the desert, untouchable, mysterious, and commanding. And while many sought to test their courage by crossing paths with her, very few succeeded, and few were still left without a sense of awe or apprehension. In her heart, however, she longed for understanding, for someone who could see her as more than just the giant woman everyone feared. She spent her days wandering the desert, moving from one place to another with careful intent. She hunted not only for survival but also to maintain her skill, keeping herself sharp and ready for anything. Her eyes, dark and observant, missed nothing. She could spot a rabbit in the brush or a distant figure moving along the horizon with remarkable clarity. She was a master of patience, knowing when to strike and when to wait. Her knowledge of the land was unparalleled. She could read the signs of weather changes, track animals by the faintest traces, and find paths through terrain that would confuse even the most experienced travelers. Her survival was not luck. It was the product of years of experience, intelligence, and an unwavering will to endure. Stories of her deeds spread across the region. Some spoke of her single-handedly protecting her family during a raid. Others told of how she had rescued lost travelers from the desert, guiding them to safety with the precision of someone who knew every stone and shadow. But with every story that celebrated her courage, there were others that amplified fear. Tales of her strength, exaggerated by imagination, painted her as an almost mythical figure, someone who could face 100 opponents and emerge victorious. These stories traveled faster than she ever could, reaching villages and camps long before she arrived, and while some people admired her, many kept their distance, afraid of what they did not understand. This mixture of reverence and fear became her constant companion. Yet she did not let these stories define her completely. Deep down, she was aware of her humanity, of her need for connection, even if she did not often act on it. She felt the sting of isolation, the emptiness that came from being seen as a legend rather than as a person. She wanted to be recognized not just for her strength, but for her thoughts, her feelings, and her intelligence. However, life had taught her caution. The world could be cruel, and those who appeared kind could harbor hidden intentions. Over time, she learned to rely on her judgment, to test people carefully, and to trust only when someone proved themselves worthy. This caution became a shield, protecting her not only from physical danger but also from the emotional harm that had touched her in the past. Her presence in the desert was like a silent force of nature. She could move for days without rest, her energy seemingly endless. She would climb hills, cross rivers, and navigate rocky terrain with ease, often leaving only the faintest trace of her passage. Animals seemed to respect her. She could approach deer or wild horses with minimal disturbance, her movements blending into the environment like a shadow. She was deeply connected to the land, understanding its rhythms and moods, and in return the land provided for her, offering shelter, water, and food in ways that seemed almost miraculous. Her life was one of balance, strength tempered by wisdom, power guided by patience. Despite all this, the world outside the desert remained a challenge. Outsiders, driven by curiosity or greed, occasionally tried to challenge her or claim her as part of their stories. Some wanted to test her strength, others to capture her for fame. She faced these challenges with a mix of skill and strategy, avoiding unnecessary confrontation whenever possible but never backing down when her honor or safety was threatened. Each encounter reinforced her reputation, further elevating the tales that traveled from village to village. She became both a guardian and a symbol, someone whose presence demanded respect, even from those who did not fully understand her. In her solitude, she reflected on her life, the choices she had made and the lessons she had learned. She knew the value of courage, not only in facing physical dangers but also in confronting the loneliness and fear that sometimes accompanied her. She recognized that her size and strength were remarkable, but they were not the only things that defined her. Her intelligence, her compassion, and her ability to persevere were equally important. And though she lived in a world that often misunderstood her, she remained steadfast, navigating life with the confidence of someone who knew her own worth. The legend of the 7-foot Apache woman was not just a tale of physical might. It was a story of resilience, survival, and the quiet strength that comes from facing life's challenges head-on. People feared her, admired her, and respected her, but few understood the woman beneath the towering figure. And while she roamed the desert, appearing untouchable and solitary, the possibility of change lingered on the horizon, a change that would arrive unexpectedly, carried by someone who could see her for who she truly was, beyond the fear and the legend. The summer sun rose slowly over the vast desert plains, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. It was during this time that a quiet cowboy arrived in the region, a man whose presence was calm but noticeable. He rode a sturdy brown horse, moving at a steady pace, his wide-brimmed hat shading a face marked by experience and patience. Unlike the rowdy travelers or boastful adventurers who sometimes passed through, this cowboy spoke little, but his silence was not emptiness. It was thoughtfulness. He seemed to notice everything around him, from the tiniest movement of a lizard in the sand to the distant flicker of sunlight reflecting off a mountain peak. People who saw him for the first time felt a sense of ease in his presence, as though he carried a quiet assurance that invited trust rather than fear. Stories of the giant Apache woman were already widespread when the cowboy first heard of her. Local villagers and wandering traders spoke her name with awe and hesitation, describing her towering height and her unmatched strength. Some told tales of her skill in hunting and tracking, while others exaggerated her abilities, claiming she could face dozens of opponents alone and emerge victorious. The stories were as fascinating as they were intimidating, and they painted a picture of a person who seemed almost larger than life. Most people would have turned away in fear or curiosity, but the cowboy reacted differently. He did not dismiss the stories, nor did he scoff at them. Instead, he listened carefully, absorbing each detail, and a quiet determination began to form within him. He wanted to meet her, not out of ambition or pride, but out of genuine curiosity and respect. He did not wish to challenge her or prove himself. He simply wanted to understand the woman behind the legend. Unlike others who had been drawn to her out of fear or desire for fame, he approached the idea with patience. He had learned from life that the world was filled with stories, but the truth was often more nuanced than the tales told by villagers around campfires. He believed that meeting her required a careful approach, one that would not provoke her or frighten her, but instead acknowledge her as an equal, as someone with experiences and feelings as complex as his own. The cowboy's approach to life was quiet but deliberate. He respected the land and the people he encountered, always observing before acting. When he first entered the territory where the Apache woman was said to roam, he moved slowly, tracking the trails without disturbing them, watching the patterns of animal life and reading the subtle signs left by the winds and sand. His horse, trained to respond to his gentle commands, moved as if it too sensed the importance of this journey. Days passed, and the cowboy's patience was tested by the harsh conditions of the desert. Sunlight beat down on him during the day, and nights were bitterly cold. Yet he endured, driven by a quiet hope that his efforts would lead to a meaningful encounter. The people of the region noticed him, as they always did when someone unusual arrived. Traders, herders, and village elders observed him with curiosity. Some whispered about his calm demeanor and his apparent respect for the land. He did not make a show of his presence, did not boast about his skills or intentions, and did not seek attention. This alone set him apart from most men who traveled through the desert, and it created a sense of intrigue. Soon, stories of the cowboy began to circulate alongside tales of the giant Apache woman. While some dismissed him as just another traveler, others felt a quiet hope that perhaps he could approach her without fear and maybe even change the stories that had surrounded her for so long. Finally, after days of careful observation and cautious travel, the cowboy reached the outskirts of the territory where the Apache woman was known to hunt and roam. He knew he had to be careful. Approaching someone of her stature required more than courage. It required respect, patience, and an understanding that any sudden movement or loud words could be interpreted as a threat. He dismounted from his horse, leading it slowly and speaking in soft tones that blended with the sounds of the desert. Each step was measured, deliberate, and thoughtful. He was aware that she could see him from a great distance, perhaps even before he saw her, and he intended to make a first impression of calmness rather than aggression. The first sight of her took him by surprise, not because he doubted the stories of her size and strength, but because there was something in her presence that transcended legend. She moved with a natural elegance that contrasted sharply with her enormous frame. Her eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to take in the entire desert at once. She paused briefly as she noticed him, her posture alert but not immediately hostile. The cowboy remained still, showing no sign of fear. He tipped his hat slightly, a small gesture of respect, and waited patiently. For a moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath, as if it too was observing this rare encounter. The Apache woman's initial reaction was one of caution, as expected. She had encountered travelers before, some curious, some reckless, some outright dangerous. Her height and strength often intimidated those who came near, and she had learned to trust her instincts above all else. Yet there was something different about this cowboy. He made no sudden movements, his voice was calm, and his eyes did not challenge or judge her. He did not carry a weapon in an aggressive manner, nor did he boast of his own abilities. For the first time, someone approached her with an intention that seemed genuine, without fear or a desire to conquer. This intrigued her, and she chose to observe him rather than flee or attack, testing his character silently. The cowboy spoke softly, in a voice that blended with the natural sounds of the desert. He asked simple questions about the land, about survival, and about the challenges she faced. He listened more than he spoke, showing respect for her answers and insights. Unlike others who had come seeking to impress or challenge her, he did not interrupt, did not belittle her knowledge, and did not treat her as a curiosity. Instead, he treated her as a person. A formidable person, yes, but a person nonetheless. The Apache woman was cautious but curious. She had never encountered someone who approached her in such a manner, someone who seemed to value understanding over fear or fame. Days passed, and the cowboy's presence became a familiar part of her daily routine. He did not rush her, nor did he impose himself. He learned to move quietly across the desert, observing her skills and respecting her space. Slowly, a bond of trust began to form. The Apache woman noticed that he was dependable, patient, and respectful of the land. He did not take more than he needed, did not disturb the wildlife unnecessarily, and seemed to understand the delicate balance between survival and respect for nature. In return, she allowed him closer, sharing small details about her life, the patterns of her hunting, and the way she navigated the vast desert. The cowboy's presence introduced a new rhythm into her life, a rhythm of quiet companionship and mutual respect. She realized that she did not need to be constantly on guard, that someone could be near her without seeking to exploit her or diminish her strength. And while she remained independent and cautious, she also began to notice a small shift within herself, a sense of curiosity about another human being, a willingness to trust, and even a hint of anticipation at his arrival each day. It was a slow transformation, almost imperceptible at first, but significant in its impact. Over time, the villagers began to notice the change as well. Rumors spread that the giant Apache woman was no longer as solitary as before, that a quiet cowboy had entered her life. Some were skeptical, some disbelieving, but those who observed closely saw the subtle signs. She still moved with strength and confidence, but there was a calmness to her demeanor, a softness in her gaze that had not been there before. The cowboy did not seek attention or recognition, yet his influence was undeniable. He had approached her not as a legend to be feared or conquered, but as a human being worthy of respect and understanding. The bond between the two grew slowly, like the desert flowers that bloomed after rare rains, unexpected, delicate, and beautiful. He did not attempt to change her, nor did he try to diminish her legend. Instead, he offered companionship and respect, allowing her to be herself while opening a door to a different way of living. She began to understand that strength was not only in physical power or fearsome reputation, but also in the courage to trust and to accept the presence of another without suspicion. By the time summer reached its peak, the cowboy had become a constant figure in her life. They shared small meals together, spoke of the desert and its creatures, and observed the stars at night. For the Apache woman, this was a new experience, a gentle intrusion into the life she had carefully constructed around independence and caution. She began to see that not all humans were threats, and that connection did not mean weakness. The quiet cowboy had not come to conquer, to impress, or to dominate. He had come simply to meet her as she was, and in doing so he had changed her world without force, without words of grandeur, but with patience, respect, and quiet strength. The first meeting between the giant Apache woman and the quiet cowboy was cautious, measured, and charged with curiosity. Neither of them rushed the moment, and both seemed to sense the importance of this encounter. The desert, vast and empty, held them in its silence, and for once the usual wind and shifting sand seemed to wait for what would happen. The Apache woman, towering above most men, observed the cowboy carefully. She had faced many travelers before, some bold, some foolish, some cruel, and each experience had taught her to rely on her instincts. She could tell within moments whether someone was trustworthy or not. And this man, he was different. There was a calmness about him, a stillness that did not challenge her or frighten her. He approached slowly, hands visible and empty of aggression, eyes steady and respectful. He spoke first, not with the bluster or bravado that often accompanied travelers in her land, but in a quiet voice that blended with the desert winds. He asked simple questions, not about her height or strength, which he seemed to accept without comment, but about the land, about the creatures that roamed it, and about the rhythms of desert life. His words were careful, respectful, and patient, and she listened, initially wary but intrigued. Few had ever addressed her in such a manner. Most people either treated her as a spectacle, a source of fear, or a legend to challenge. He treated her as a person. She had spent her life moving through a world where others often misunderstood her, feared her, or exaggerated her abilities for their own amusement or tales. This quiet man, so different from all others, made her pause and consider the possibility of trust. At first, the Apache woman did not speak much. Her silence was deliberate. It was a way of testing him, of understanding whether he would remain patient and respectful even in the face of her size and power. She watched the way he handled himself, his movements, his speech, and the care he showed for the land around him. She noticed how he walked softly, how he avoided startling animals, and how he seemed to observe everything before acting. He was careful but confident, aware of the world without imposing himself upon it. Slowly she began to answer his questions, sharing small pieces of her knowledge. She spoke of hidden water sources, of animal tracks, of the paths that wound through the mountains and deserts. Her words were guarded but informative, and he listened attentively, never interrupting, never belittling what she said. Days passed with this cautious interaction. The cowboy did not push, nor did he try to force her into conversation or companionship. Instead, he respected her space and allowed her to reveal herself at her own pace. For the Apache woman, this was a rare experience. People had always approached her with fear, aggression, or a desire to impress. She had grown accustomed to solitude, relying on her own strength and knowledge to navigate life. Yet here was someone who treated her differently. He acknowledged her abilities without exaggeration, respected her presence without fear, and showed genuine curiosity without intrusion. Slowly, walls she had built over years of isolation began to crack, not through force or persuasion, but through the quiet consistency of his presence. As they spent more time together, the Apache woman began to notice small details about him that others had overlooked. He carried himself with dignity and patience, spoke with thoughtfulness, and seemed to understand the land in ways that mirrored her own knowledge. He did not try to compete with her, nor did he express awe in a way that would make her feel objectified. Instead, he treated her as an equal, someone whose strength, wisdom, and experience deserved respect. For the first time she felt seen, not as a legend, not as a monster, not as a towering figure to be feared, but as a human being with depth, intelligence, and heart. This realization was both unsettling and comforting. She had spent so long hiding behind her strength and independence that the idea of being understood by another person was almost foreign. Their conversations began to deepen. They spoke of survival and hardship, of the lessons the desert had taught them both. She shared stories of her family, of challenges faced and overcome, and of the loneliness that often accompanied her life. He in turn spoke of his travels, his experiences with other people, and his observations of the land. He did not boast or complain, he simply shared, offering insight into a world that was different from hers. but respectful of her perspective. Through these exchanges, trust began to build. She realized that he would not betray her confidence, that he would not leave or exploit her, and that his intentions were sincere. The desert, once a place of solitude and caution, began to feel less empty with his presence nearby. One day, as the sun dipped below the mountains and the sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the Apache woman allowed herself to speak more openly. She told him about the fears she carried despite her strength, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of losing her independence, and the quiet ache of loneliness. The cowboy listened without interruption, nodding occasionally, but never offering empty reassurance. He simply acknowledged her words, validating her experiences without judgment. For her, this was a revelation. She had long believed that strength meant hiding vulnerability, that showing weakness was dangerous. Yet here was someone who could accept her fully, without diminishing her power or imposing his own expectations. Their bond began to grow not out of grand gestures, but through small, meaningful actions. He helped her with practical tasks, not because she could not do them herself, but as a way of showing cooperation and respect. They shared meals, hunted together when necessary, and observed the patterns of desert life. Through these shared moments, a sense of companionship emerged. It was not a hurried friendship, nor was it defined by societal expectations. It was built on mutual respect, understanding, and the quiet acknowledgement of each other's abilities. For the Apache woman, this companionship was transformative. She began to see that strength and trust were not mutually exclusive, and that opening herself to another person did not mean losing control or independence. The villagers who had long feared her noticed the change as well. While she remained formidable and commanding, there was a subtle shift in her demeanor. She moved with a confidence that had always been present, but now there was a hint of calmness, of patience, that had not been there before. Her interactions with the cowboy were careful but genuine, and those who observed from a distance began to whisper about the unusual bond forming between them. Some were skeptical, some doubtful, but others recognized the change as something positive, a sign that even the most fearsome among them could find connection and understanding. One evening, as they sat beside a small fire under a blanket of stars, the Apache woman realized the depth of her own transformation. She felt a sense of comfort in his presence, a trust that had been absent for years. She understood that this quiet cowboy had not come to conquer her, to test her strength, or to impress her. He had come to meet her as she truly was, recognizing her abilities and her humanity alike. And in doing so, he had begun to reshape her perception of the world. She began to imagine a future where strength and companionship could coexist, where fear and respect could be balanced, and where her life could hold more than survival and solitude. By the end of their first weeks together, the Apache woman had made a conscious choice. She would continue to move through the desert as she always had, independent and strong, but she would also allow this cowboy to be part of her life. She realized that this did not diminish her legend or her power. Rather, it added a new dimension to her existence. Strength was not only measured by the ability to fight or survive, but also by the courage to trust, to connect, and to embrace change. In the cowboy, she saw not a threat but a companion, someone who could walk beside her without overshadowing her, without challenging her, and without fear. The quiet cowboy had achieved something remarkable without trying to impress or dominate. Through patience, respect, and understanding, he had begun to break through the walls the Apache woman had built over a lifetime. Their first true encounter had been cautious, deliberate, and measured, but it had laid the foundation for a relationship built on trust and mutual respect. For the Apache woman, this was an unexpected and profound shift. She had always believed that her strength and independence meant solitude, yet now she began to glimpse a different way of life, one where strength and companionship could coexist, and where the desert, vast and relentless, could feel a little less lonely with the right person nearby. The days in the desert had begun to take on a new rhythm for the Apache woman. Before, her life had been defined by constant vigilance, by careful calculation of every step she took, and by the knowledge that danger or misunderstanding could appear at any moment. But with the cowboy's presence, something had changed. He did not disrupt her routines or demand attention. He moved beside her in silence when needed, spoke when appropriate, and always showed respect for her space and abilities. This careful balance created an environment in which she could begin to relax, to allow small glimpses of herself to emerge, glimpses that had long been hidden behind the walls built by fear, independence, and solitude. The cowboy introduced a quiet stability into her life. He did not try to alter her routines or instruct her on how to live, but his calm consistency was enough to make a difference. When they hunted together, he allowed her to lead, following her guidance rather than imposing his own. When they traveled, he remained alert to dangers she might have missed, offering support without intrusion. Even the simplest moments, like sharing a meal or watching the desert sun sink below the mountains, became meaningful because they were shared with someone who respected her as she was. Slowly, she began to recognize that strength was not only measured by solitary survival, but also by the courage to accept help, companionship, and trust. She discovered the joys of simple companionship. For years she had been alone, her enormous size and fearsome reputation keeping others at a distance. But with the cowboy, she could share experiences without losing her independence. She found herself laughing quietly at his observations, enjoying his calm demeanor, and even seeking his company during the cooler hours of the desert night. This was a new sensation for her, the feeling that she did not need to be constantly on guard, that someone could be near her without posing a threat. It was both comforting and strange, and she sometimes marveled at how much lighter her life felt with him present. Through their time together, the Apache woman began to see the world differently. She had always been observant, aware of every detail in the desert, the shifting sands, the tracks of animals, the signs of approaching storms. But now she noticed subtler things. The way the light changed on the mountains at dawn, the quiet beauty of distant clouds reflecting colors she had not taken time to see before. The cowboy did not point these things out, nor did he force her to notice them. He simply moved through life with a quiet attentiveness that allowed her to notice them herself. In his presence, the world felt richer, more detailed, and more alive. The villagers and travelers who had long feared her began to notice subtle changes as well. While she was still the giant Apache woman, formidable and strong, there was a shift in how she carried herself. She moved with the same confidence, but there was now a calmness to her presence, a sense of control that went beyond mere physical power. She still commanded respect, but it was tempered with an air of quiet dignity rather than intimidation. People whispered that the fearsome figure of the desert had softened, not in strength but in temperament. The cowboy's influence was invisible yet profound. He had not changed who she was, nor had he diminished her reputation. He had only helped her reveal aspects of herself that had long been hidden, aspects that allowed her to experience life more fully. One afternoon, as they rested near a small oasis, the Apache woman reflected on the changes she had felt. She realized that she had been carrying a great burden: responsibility, isolation, and the constant awareness of how others perceived her. Strength had always been her shield, but it had also been her cage. She had relied on fear and awe to keep others at bay, but now she understood that true strength included the ability to trust, to open herself to connection, and to embrace the possibility of joy. The cowboy had shown her, not through words or instruction, but through consistent respect and patience, that she could be both strong and open, formidable and compassionate. The transformation was not sudden. It unfolded slowly, through shared experiences and mutual understanding. The cowboy did not rush her, and she did not force herself to change. Yet each day she allowed herself to enjoy something new, perhaps a conversation under the stars, the quiet companionship of a shared meal, or the simple pleasure of observing the desert together. These small moments accumulated, creating a sense of normalcy and peace that had been absent from her life for as long as she could remember. She began to notice that she looked forward to these times, that they brought a lightness to her spirit that even her greatest achievements in strength or survival could not provide. The cowboy, too, showed his influence through actions rather than words. He shared his skills without overstepping, assisted when needed without taking control, and treated her as an equal partner in every endeavor. When they faced challenges, crossing difficult terrain, finding food, or navigating sudden weather changes, he offered support, always deferring to her judgment when appropriate, yet never withdrawing when his assistance could be valuable. This balance of independence and cooperation strengthened their bond. The Apache woman began to trust him fully, knowing that he would neither betray her nor underestimate her abilities. She felt a rare sense of security, the kind that comes not from walls or weapons but from shared understanding and mutual respect. In addition to the practical benefits of his presence, the cowboy introduced a subtle emotional support that she had long lacked. For years she had been admired from afar, but rarely understood. People saw her strength and feared it, but few acknowledged the human being beneath the legend. With him, she could express herself honestly, share her fears and frustrations, and discuss her experiences without the need to conceal vulnerability. This emotional openness was a revelation. She discovered that trust could coexist with strength, and that companionship did not weaken her. It enhanced her ability to experience life fully. The quiet moments by the fire, the long walks through the desert, and the shared silence became as important as any physical feat she had ever accomplished. Their relationship grew into a partnership based on equality and understanding. He respected her autonomy, she respected his presence, and together they navigated the desert in a rhythm that suited both of them. She realized that this was not about changing who she was. It was about expanding her life to include someone who valued her not for her size or reputation, but for her character, wisdom, and heart. She began to embrace the idea that connection could exist without compromise, that strength and trust could coexist, and that life could hold more than solitude and survival. This was a profound shift in perspective, one that transformed not only her day-to-day life but also her understanding of herself. Through their time together, the Apache woman also began to influence the cowboy in subtle ways. She shared her knowledge of the land, taught him about tracking and survival in harsh conditions, and offered insights into the ways of the desert that only someone who had lived there fully could understand. In return, he respected her expertise, learned patiently, and integrated her lessons into their shared experiences. This mutual respect created a dynamic of growth for both of them, a partnership in which neither dominated the other, but each contributed to the well-being and understanding of the other. It was a balance that reinforced the idea that strength was not just individual, but also collaborative. As weeks passed, the Apache woman recognized that her life had shifted in ways she had never anticipated. She remained the towering, formidable figure of legend, but her perspective had deepened. She no longer relied solely on fear or reputation to define her existence. She had discovered the power of trust, patience, and emotional connection. She had realized that her strength could coexist with companionship, and that opening herself to another person did not diminish her independence or her abilities. The quiet cowboy had brought this transformation not through force or instruction, but through consistent respect, understanding, and the willingness to meet her as an equal. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon each evening, the Apache woman and the cowboy had formed a bond that was unspoken yet profound. They moved through the desert as a unit, aware of each other's presence and attuned to each other's rhythms. Their partnership was not defined by grand gestures or dramatic actions, but by the quiet accumulation of trust, shared experiences, and mutual respect. For her, this was the beginning of a new life, a life in which strength and companionship could coexist, where fear could be replaced by trust, and where the desert, vast and unforgiving, could feel a little less lonely. Time in the desert moved at its own pace, measured not by clocks or calendars, but by the rising and setting of the sun, the shifting winds, and the quiet rhythms of life in the wilderness. For the Apache woman, these rhythms had always been harsh and unforgiving. Every day had been a test of endurance, of skill, of courage, but with the cowboy by her side, she began to experience time differently. The days were still full of challenges, of survival and navigation through difficult terrain, but there was also a new dimension, companionship. She no longer faced life completely alone. Someone walked beside her who respected her strength, shared her burdens, and saw her as more than a legend or a figure of fear. This simple yet profound presence transformed her world. Their partnership grew naturally, without force or expectation. The cowboy never tried to change her, and she never felt the need to hide who she truly was. She remained the towering 7-foot Apache woman of legend, still unmatched in strength and skill. But now she carried a sense of calm and balance that had been absent before. He encouraged her to trust, to explore the lighter aspects of life, and to embrace the joy that could exist even in the desert's harshest corners. Slowly she began to allow herself to relax, to laugh more freely, and to feel a sense of peace she had not known for many years. Their companionship became a source of quiet strength, reinforcing both her independence and her humanity. The people who once feared her began to notice the change as well. Villagers, traders, and travelers whispered about the enormous Apache woman who had once inspired dread, but now moved with a new grace and calmness. They saw that she remained formidable, capable of incredible feats of strength, yet there was a softness in her eyes, a subtle warmth in her demeanor. Her reputation shifted from fear to respect, not just because of her size or skill, but because of her courage, wisdom, and the way she allowed herself to connect with another human being. The cowboy's influence was never overt, but it had reshaped how she was perceived and, more importantly, together they navigated the desert's challenges as a team. When hunting, they moved with precision and coordination, each learning from the other's knowledge and experience. When seeking water or shelter, they shared responsibilities, finding solutions together rather than independently. Even the simple act of moving through the desert became an exercise in trust and communication. She had long relied solely on herself, but now she realized that true strength included the ability to share burdens, to accept assistance when needed, and to value the perspectives of another. This realization did not diminish her power. Instead, it enhanced it, giving her a deeper understanding of life and human connection. Over time, the Apache woman's sense of self expanded. She had always been proud of her strength and independence, but now she discovered that strength could also be measured by openness, trust, and the willingness to form meaningful bonds. The cowboy had shown her that companionship did not make her weaker. It allowed her to experience life more fully. She began to imagine a future not defined by solitude or fear, but by shared experiences and mutual support. This shift in perspective was profound, reshaping not only her daily life but also her understanding of what it meant to be strong, capable, and human. The cowboy, too, benefited from their partnership. He had traveled widely and faced many challenges alone, but with the Apache woman he experienced a new depth of connection. Her knowledge of the land, her keen instincts, and her extraordinary skills taught him lessons he had never encountered before. He learned patience in new ways, discovered insights into survival and resilience, and found inspiration in her courage and determination. Their relationship was reciprocal, each contributing to the growth and well-being of the other. In her, he found not just a companion, but a teacher, a partner, and an equal who could share both the hardships and the quiet joys of life in the desert. As the seasons changed, their bond deepened. They faced storms, scorching heat, and treacherous terrain, yet they did so together. Challenges that once would have tested them alone now became shared experiences, opportunities to support each other and demonstrate trust. The Apache woman began to feel a sense of security she had never known, not from walls or weapons, but from the presence of someone who understood and respected her. She realized that strength was not merely physical. It was emotional, mental, and relational. The cowboy had helped her discover that strength could coexist with trust, independence with companionship, and legend with humanity. The transformation in her life did not go unnoticed by the wider world. Stories began to circulate about the giant Apache woman who had once inspired fear, but now moved through the desert with a quiet grace and a trusted companion. Travelers spoke of her strength, wisdom, and courage, but they also spoke of her kindness, patience, and ability to connect with another person. Her legend evolved from one of intimidation to one of respect and inspiration. People admired her not only for her physical abilities, but also for her emotional courage, her openness, and the partnership she had forged. The cowboy, though quiet, became a silent part of her legend, known for his patience, respect, and unwavering support. Through it all, the Apache woman never lost her independence or her formidable skills. She remained capable of surviving alone, defending herself, and navigating the desert with unmatched expertise. But she had discovered something more valuable than mere survival: companionship, trust, and the ability to share her life with someone who saw her fully. She could still face danger with confidence, yet she now did so knowing that she did not have to face life's challenges entirely alone. This balance of strength and connection became a defining feature of her later life, a testament to the power of patience, respect, and understanding in transforming even the most solitary of lives. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples, the Apache woman and the cowboy often sat together, watching the changing colors and listening to the subtle sounds of the desert at dusk. These moments, quiet and unassuming, became some of the most cherished in her life. She realized that the greatest strength did not always come from fighting or enduring alone, but from allowing oneself to trust, to connect, and to embrace the possibility of joy alongside another. The cowboy's presence had shown her that life could hold both power and peace, solitude and companionship, legend and humanity. In the end, the Apache woman's life had been transformed, not by force or dramatic events, but by the gentle, consistent influence of someone who saw her for who she truly was. Her fate, once defined by fear, legend, and solitude, now included trust, respect, and the quiet comfort of companionship. She remained the towering, formidable figure of the desert, but her story had expanded to include courage of a different kind, the courage to open her heart, to embrace connection, and to allow herself the possibility of happiness alongside another human being. Her legend endured, but it was now enriched by the depth of her transformation, a testament to resilience, wisdom, and the unexpected power of human connection. The giant Apache woman and the quiet cowboy continued to navigate life together, facing challenges, celebrating victories, and sharing the beauty of the desert. Their partnership became a story in itself, one whispered by travelers and villagers alike. It was a tale not of fear or intimidation, but of respect, courage, and the quiet strength that comes from understanding, trust, and companionship. She had discovered that a person could be both powerful and open, independent and connected, formidable and compassionate, and in that discovery, her life and her legend were forever changed.